Okay, hello everybody to today's seminar. Today we have Parijat Dey, who will be talking about this bootstrap program in conformal field theory and how we can use that to constrain the space of conformal field theories. So over to Parijat.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to present my work here. So I will be talking about how to constrain conformal field theories, which is mostly based on this paper with NSABC from Uppsala and Tobias Hansen, who is now at Oxford. So conformal field theories describe the physics at critical points, and they describe second order phase transition in fluids, magnets, and many other materials. Now, at critical point, a system is strongly coupled, and it is very difficult to study such systems since the standard tools of perturbative quantum field theory cannot be applied there. So I will specifically be talking about the conformal bootstrap techniques, and conformal bootstrap has emerged as a viable tool to study such systems. So this is a self-constraining process which relies entirely on the symmetries that we have at the critical point. And we will see how these can be used to give an estimate for the critical exponents in a theory. So let's get started. So this is a brief outline of my talk. So I am going to begin with the motivation. So this will tell us how our understanding of different phases of matter is based on symmetry, and precisely at the critical point, it is governed by conformal symmetry. So I will talk about the existing methods to study such systems and what is already known in literature. Then I will focus on the basic aspects of conformal field theory, what are the symmetries and when is it useful. I will talk about the conformal bootstrap techniques that can be used to study such systems. And then I will move on to the main topic of today's talk, which is a dispersion relation in the context of conformal field theory. So I will tell you how a conformal correlator can be computed using a dispersion relation. And specifically, I will talk about this in the context of Wilson-Fisher theory, which is a scalar field theory in with phi-4 interaction. And finally, I'll summarize with some open questions and future directions. So let's get started. So the goal is to develop a framework to calculate critical exponents in a critical system. So close to the critical point, we measure various properties of the system. For example, we can measure specific heat, susceptibility, and other properties as we vary the external parameters in the system. So to orient ourselves, let's talk about two specific such systems, so which is the critical point of water and the Ising spin system. So let's start with the example of water. So this is the phase diagram of water. So this is a pressure versus temperature curve, and it has three phases: ice, water, and water vapor. And these are the boundaries that separate these different phases. And this is the critical point. I hope my cursor is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So now we can measure the specific heat of this system close to the critical point. And thus it turns out that the specific heat diverges in a certain way when we are close to the critical point. And the way it diverges is controlled by this exponent alpha, which is known as the specific heat exponent. Now let's move on to the second example of a 2D Ising model. So what is a 2D Ising model? So the way this works is that we have a bunch of spins on a 2D lattice, and these spins can either point up or down. And I will use this variable sigma I to denote the spin at the lattice site I. And this sigma I can take value either +1 or -1, depending on whether the spin is pointing up or down. This is the Hamiltonian of the 2D Ising model. J is a coupling. And here the sum over angular bracket ij implies that we are summing over nearest neighboring spins. So this is only with the nearest neighboring interaction. Now from this, we can see that it costs energy when two neighboring spins are different. So what are the phases of this model? So this system has two phases where the spins correlate differently. So it has ordered phase where all the spins are aligned in the same direction. So this is known as a ferromagnetic phase. And it has also the disordered phase where the spins are randomly oriented. So this is the paramagnetic phase. Now, let's see what happens close to the critical point between these two phases. Now, at the critical point between these two phases, it turns out that the physics is described by a continuous order parameter field phi, which depends continuously on the spacetime coordinates x. And the dynamics of this order parameter field is captured by this action. So this is the Lagrangian for this field, scalar field phi. This is the kinetic term and this is the potential term. Now, when the value of m square is positive, then we are in the ordered phase. And when m square is negative, we are in the disordered phase. So tuning the value of
a kind of stupid question. So if you are in d dimensions, why should be lambda to the 5 to the power 4 here?
So we can actually have any term. So I will specifically be talking about 4 minus epsilon. I mean the Wilson Fisher
We're
theory.
talking about 4 minus epsilon
Yes,
specifically.
yeah. So that will become clear in a couple of slides maybe. But in principle, we can have any other interaction term. Okay, so tuning the value of m square from positive to negative takes us to the phase transition. And when we are precisely at the critical point, m square is 0. So this term goes away. And at the critical point, the correlation length diverges. So it means that now we have a large number of degrees of freedom that are strongly correlated. And due to this, the standard tools of perturbative quantum field theory cannot be applied here. Now, the critical theory is described by a scale invariant conformal field theory. So at critical point, there is something nice that happens. So this is known as critical universality. So the critical exponents are the same for the Ising model or the spin system and the water. Now, these are two completely different systems. So microscopically, two completely different systems. So in one case, we have a bunch of water molecules. And in the other case, we have a bunch of spins pointing up or down. Even then, they have the same critical exponent. So this is known as
spin model is in what dimension?
Sorry?
What is the dimension of the spin model? Is it also 3?
Yes.
No, it is 2, but you have 1, but temperature adds the extra dimension. So it's 2 plus 1. Like
I will actually describe it in detail.
3D Ising model and 2D Ising model have different exponents.
Yes, yes. I will, whatever I will be talking about, it's greater than 2. So this is the 3D Ising model.
3D Ising model.
Yes. So the question is, how do we measure the critical exponents?
But can I ask something? So this
Yes.
This scaling, when you have scale invariance, it implies conformal invariance. Has it been proven in 3D?
No, there is no such proof directly as, I mean, in 3 dimension, but there is also no counter example. So this is some kind of like assumption.
So,
but the critical point, that is the conformal invariant. So this is, it is not only scale invariant. So all the symmetries are there.
No, but there is an analog of a C theorem in 3D, which uses this F function, right? The
Mhm.
internal entropy of a sphere. I mean, has it been used to make some explicit claim that, or some, is it that there would be conformal invariance also when you have scale invariance?
No, as far as I know, there is no such explicit proof.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the universality class for the Ising model. So this is the Ising universality class. So the system of water, the magnetic system and Ising model, they're in the same universality class, and it is described by a 5⁴ scalar field theory. So what is the status of the Ising model? So 1D Ising model was solved by Ernst Ising in 1925. 2D Ising model was solved by Lars Onsager in 1944. However, there is no analytic solution for the 3D Ising model as of now. So the question is, can the 3D Ising model yield an analytic solution?
I suppose you know the result of a theoretical computer scientist named Soren Israel. He said that the computing the free energy of the random bond Ising model, not this, but is NP complete or something like that. Is in NP.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I don't know what it really implies for this thing, but the 3D Ising model exponent is probably, I mean, I think it implies that there will be no analytic solution for the 3D Ising model. But we know the exponents via Monte Carlo, etc., to fairly high precision.
Yes, yes.
I do not anticipate that any method should this thing, in some sense, solve this problem. That means you're solving an NP complete problem through linear
Yes.
programming.
Yeah, but I think the point here is not to really analytically solve it.
Yeah, that I understand. That is the point. That is the whole thing. Yeah.
So
Yes,
yeah.
I will talk about like this, I mean, the existing tools to study this, like using some of
No,
the-
that point is correct. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying don't expect analytical solution. We don't need it.
We don't need it.
Yeah, in fact, McCoy and Wu, they have this book on the Ising model, and at the end of it, they have a comment about list of problems to do, and then their point is analytic solution of the 3D Ising model. It's a waste of time, according to them. Conceptually, 2D Ising model told us that there's a non-trivial phase transition. The rest are details, according to them. But you should, if you have a chance, you should look at the appendix to that book. They're very acidic people, so it's a lot of fun to read it.
Sure. Thanks for the reference. Okay, so I should proceed. Okay, so what is the existing approach to study such systems? So this is the Wilson-Fisher theory. So Ken Wilson said that it is sometimes useful to think of a quantum field theory in fractional dimensions. So instead of studying the quantum field theory in 4 dimensions, he studied this in 4 minus epsilon dimensions and used epsilon to be a very small parameter. So this is the Wilson-Fisher theory for the ON model, where we have n scalar fields, phi I, where I runs from 1 to n. And this is the 5⁴ interaction term written in ON invariant way. And this lambda is the coupling. Now for a particular value of this coupling lambda, we are at the Wilson-Fisher fixed point or the critical point for this system. Now this system describes physically interesting systems for different values of n. So when n is equal to 1, so we have only one scalar field and epsilon equals 1, we have the 3D Ising model universality class. And when n equals 2 and epsilon equals 1, we get the superfluid helium. Now the specific heat exponent is related to the dimension of the field phi square. So I will formally define the dimension in a bit, but we will use this delta phi square to denote the dimension of the composite field phi square. So this is the precise relation between the specific heat exponent alpha and the operator dimension. And similarly, the correlation length exponent, which tells us how two fields at different points are correlated, This is given by this exponent eta, and this is related to the operator dimension of the fundamental scalar field phi. So these relations tells us that computing the critical exponent in a CFT is equivalent to computing the operator dimension in the theory. So we compute the operator dimensions perturbatively in Wilson-Fisher theory in epsilon, using epsilon as a perturbative parameter, and we end up getting this. So this is the operator dimension for phi squared, and it can be computed up to a certain order in epsilon depending on the complexity of the Feynman diagrams. And finally, we put epsilon equals 1 and n equals some specific value depending on which universality class we are in. So if we want to compute this exponent for the 3D Ising model, we put epsilon equals 1 and n equals 1, and we end up getting this number for this exponent.
Actually, I have a question here which I never knew know the answer to. So, is this what is the radius of convergence of this series in epsilon?
This is an asymptotic expansion. So the
There is zero radius of convergence.
Yes.
I see.
But
So,
this is frankly speaking, this is apparently illegal to just put epsilon equals 1. We need proper resummation techniques.
No,
to
actually, it's not that illegal. In fact, if you know if you have an asymptotic series, there is a point. If you look at the error, right, it decreases and then starts increasing. So there's something called an optimal truncation. It's called superasymptotic truncation. But we generally don't know what it is. So if you the epsilon expansion, what it says is that if you keep on putting more and more terms, it will keep improving, and suddenly it will start becoming bad. Okay, so
depending on an epsilon, you will have to keep an optimal number of terms.
Yeah, so we don't know what the optimal number is, but definitely it may. We are hoping it will be more than 2. So
Yes.
In that sense, in fact, interesting thing is that in implementations in mathematical and functions, they use asymptotic formula because you require fewer terms in the convergence. I mean, as long as you are within optimal truncation and you have some errors, it's faster than regular convergent power series.
Okay, Parijat, I have another question because this is also, I don't know the answer. I've always wanted to know. So is this Borel summable, this series?
Yes, yeah.
It is Borel summable. Okay, yes. That's great. Okay, so because that would have been weird if it is not Borel summable, because I wouldn't know how to interpret the Borel pole.
Yeah. Then you can estimate the optimal.
Yes, yeah.
Then you can estimate the optimal number of terms. You can for n equal to 1. You can estimate.
Okay. Okay, so trans series is trivial. Basically, here you just simply have you simply have can simply do the Borel summation. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
Great.
right. So, is there any other question?
No. Okay. I mean, not from me, at least.
Okay, then I should proceed. Okay, so this is the original paper by Wilson in 1973. So he computed these Feynman diagrams, evaluated the operator dimensions up to a certain order. And if we want to go to higher orders in epsilon to make it more precise, we have to evaluate many more Feynman diagrams. So these are like the 4-loop and 5-loop Feynman diagrams for the phi-4 theory. And you can see that at 5-loop, it's like very complicated. So the bottom line is that this is a perfectly well-defined approach. You can compute the Feynman diagrams perturbatively in epsilon at any order you wish, but this is really complicated and you have to regularize and renormalize in a certain way. So it's a bit painful. And most importantly, this approach does not make use of the enhanced conformal symmetry at the critical point. And we know that the critical theory is conformally invariant. So the question is, can conformal symmetry help? I will now discuss an alternative way of studying quantum field theory at the fixed point without using a Lagrangian or Feynman diagram. So this is a paper by Polyakov in 1974. So he used conformal symmetry to study the same system in 4 minus epsilon dimension in a Lagrangian free approach. So this was actually parallelly being developed when Wilson was developing this renormalization group ideas. So what is a conformal field theory? The conformal field theories are quantum field theories that are invariant under conformal transformation. So we have 4 of it. It's translation, Lorentz transformation, scaled invariance, and special conformal transformation. So these are the extra symmetries that we have now in a conformal field theory. And it is some transformation that preserves the angle between the curve. So this is a pictorial representation. So if we go from this diagram to this one, you see that all the angles between the curves are invariant. Now, under a scale transformation, when we scale x by lambda x, where lambda is a scaling parameter, then the operators in the theory transform this way. So this exponent delta over here, so this is known as a scaling dimension of the operator rho. So conformal field theories are described by the spectrum. So we have infinite number of operators specified by their dimension and spin. So these are the quantum numbers now. And we have operator product expansion. So it means that if we have 2 operators at point I and j, then we can write the product of these 2 operators as a sum over an infinite number of operators, OK, with these coefficients. So these coefficients are known as the OP coefficient. And the nice thing about conformal field theory is that this is a convergent expression. So these numbers, delta and lambda for a given spin, so these are known as the CFT data. So the physical information about the phase transition is encoded in this CFT data. So if we can compute all of these CFT data, we can completely fix the theory. So our goal is to find the CFT data. Now in a conformal field theory, we are interested in computing correlation functions. So the language we use is in terms of correlators. And the power of conformal symmetry lies in the fact that it completely fixes the 1, 2, and 3 point function. So the 1 point function of an operator is 0 unless it's an identity operator. The 2 point function is also completely fixed by symmetry. So if we have an operator at x1 and another one at x2, then this is non-vanishing only when they are the same operators. And this exponent here, delta I, this is the scaling dimension of this operator O. And this is a 3 point function, which is again fixed from conformal symmetry up to a number C. So this number C is related to the OP coefficient of the operators. Now the dynamics of a conformal field theory is encoded in its 4 point function. So suppose we have 4 identical scalar operators inserted at 4 different points, x1, x2, x3, and x4. Then we can construct conformally invariant cross ratios defined this way. So since we have 4 points here, we have 2 cross ratios, z and z bar. So this is the definition of the cross ratios. And the 4 point function is a function of these cross ratios only. So this is completely fixed from symmetry. And this function fzz bar can be written like this. So we have a sum over delta and L, which are the quantum numbers. So the operator dimension and the operator spin. And the coefficients here. So these are known as the squared of the OP coefficients of the operators getting exchanged with dimension delta. This
So here you're defining the global conformal blocks, right? Not the local ones.
This is in d greater than 2.
D greater than 2. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So these functions delta L, so these are known as the conformal blocks. So these are known functions in a sense that they satisfy a Casimir differential equation, and they can be computed by solving this differential equation. So this was done by Dolan and Osborne. But the closed form expression of this conformal block is not known in any dimension. Only the integral representation is known in any dimension.
Well, for rational conformal field theories in 2D, you do know, right? I mean, some of these conformal blocks are explicitly known for the Ising model in 2D, for example.
Yeah, it's some hypergeometric. It's only hypergeometric in that case. Yeah, those are
Even
finite.
in higher D, you know it for 4 dimensions also, that I will show you in a couple of slides. But there are also some recursion relation that tells you how to, go to other dimensions. But the closed form expression is known in 2D and 4D.
Okay.
Okay, so now inside the 4-point function, you can fuse together operator 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And this is known as the S-channel expansion. And this is pictorially what it means. So we have operators 1 and 2. They're interacting via the exchange of an operator of dimension delta and spin L. And these are the corresponding OP coefficients of these exchanged operators. Now, we could have as well expanded this correlator in the T channel, where we fuse together operator 1 and 4 and 2 and 3. So this is the T channel. And if OPE is associative, then these two expansion must be the same. So the S channel and T channel must be equal. So this is just the pictorial representation. Let's try to make it a bit more precise in terms of conformal blocks. So this is the equality of S channel and T channel, and this is known as the conformal bootstrap equation. So this is the S channel correlator, and this is a T channel. So we can go from S channel to T channel by changing the coordinates appropriately. So changing Z to 1 minus Z and Z bar to 1 minus Z bar takes us from S to T channel. And this is the precise equation, the conformal bootstrap equation. So this equation involves the CFT data as unknowns. So we have these deltas here in the summation, and these OP coefficients are also unknown. So this is a functional constraint on the CFT data, and it must be satisfied for all values of the cross ratios Z and Z bar. So our goal is to solve this bootstrap equation and try to compute the CFT data. So the bottom line is that the bootstrap philosophy is to focus on a CFT itself and not on a specific microscopic realization. So there is no Lagrangian, no Feynman diagram, but we exploit only the consequences of conformal symmetry. That is the OP associativity and crossing symmetry. Now this is an old idea that originated in 1970s due to Ferrara, Grillo, Gatto, and Polyakov, but it is revived in 2008 by Ratajczak, Rychkov, Tony, and Vicky. So they used a numerical method based on linear programming, and they extracted some critical exponents for the Ising model. And each universality class corresponds to a different CFT with a different set of CFT data. Now, let's see how to solve the bootstrap equation. So the equation has two infinite sum over delta and L, and this delta is also an unknown. So this is very complicated to solve this equation because of this double infinite sum. Moreover, the conformal blocks G's, these are very complicated functions of cross ratios. just to give you an idea how complicated these are. So the closed form expression is known in 4 dimensions in terms of hypergeometric functions. So this is how it is. So it's a product of 2 hypergeometric functions with arguments that depends on z and z bar. So this is this is k. So this is some exponent times some hypergeometric function. Now from this expression, you can see that if you try to plug this in here and try to compute the unknowns, it's very difficult to solve and get analytic results. So we need
this equation is in which theory? For any arbitrary theory, that this expression that you wrote is for
yes, yes.
and
Any
this simply
greater
comes from the global conformal symmetry. Also, if you apply all the global conformal group operators, then you get this as a requirement.
Yes, for any d greater than 2, this is valid.
That completely fixes this. Okay, I see.
Yes.
Thanks.
Now there are several approaches to compute the CFT data, both analytical and numerical. Now here I should mention that these techniques are being developed by several groups, and I will only be talking about the stuff that has directly overlap with what I am doing. So I am working on analytical aspects of this conformal bootstrap, and there are like several tools to study this from the CFT data. So namely the Polyakov-Mellin bootstrap, large spin bootstrap, dispersion relation, or the Lorentzian inversion formula. So today I will talk about this dispersion relation in the context of conformal field theory. So what are the challenges to compute the correlator from the CFT data? So suppose we know the CFT data by like this Polyakov-Mellin bootstrap and large spin bootstrap, we can actually compute the CFT data. So suppose we know the CFT data and then we want to compute the correlator. So then we have to do this resummation. So this may not be always possible to do the resummation and obtain a closed form expression to compute the correlator. So the question is it possible to obtain the correlator directly without resumming the CFT data? And another question is that, is it possible to constrain a CFT with a less number of data? So we know that in order to specify a CFT, we need both the spectrum and the OP coefficients. Now the question is it possible that a less number of that data specifies the same CFT? So we will see that the answer is yes. So we'll exploit the analytic properties and crossing symmetry of the correlator. And we'll show that in a perturbative conformal field theory, the spectrum determines the correlator perturbatively. Now the spectrum
what is a perturbative CFT?
I mean, you have a perturbative parameter that you can expand the CFT data in.
So it's some fixed point under some flow. Is that what
Yes.
you have in mind?
Yeah.
But why it is surprising, because maybe, yeah, what I mean is that is analogous to conformal perturbation theory, right? So that the original conformal perturbation theory should determine the flow, marginal flow, right? So anyway, maybe I can ask this question later. I mean,
yeah, actually, if you want to compute the correlator, then you need if you look at this expression, you see that in order to compute the correlator, then you need both the C delta L's and the deltas. So this is the OP coefficient and the spectrum. And what I am saying now, that if you have a perturbative CFT, then you can fix the correlator just by using the information of these deltas. So C deltas are like you don't need it to fix.
No, I'm just asking whether you're perturbing around. So it's like a conformal perturbation theory that you're doing, that you're perturbing around the CFT itself.
Yeah, I'm perturbing around, say, mean field theory. I will actually, I mean, show it in detail
Oh,
in maybe.
anyway, okay, let's ask it later.
Yeah. So when we talk about this dispersion relation, we use the spectrum as an input. So either by using like some Polyakov-Mellin bootstrap. So this was developed by Polyakov in 1974 and later reformulated by Gopakumar, Kaviraj Sen and Sinha recently. You can use these tools to compute the spectrum. And this is the schematic representation of the dispersion relation that we have. So you use the input or this for the 2-point function of the spectrum, feed in the dispersion relation, and then you end up getting the 4-point function or the correlator. So what is the dispersion relation? So the dispersion relation enables us to construct a function from the knowledge of its discontinuity. This is based on Cauchy's residue theorem. So suppose we have a function f of z, and the idea is that we write this function f of z as the residue of its pole. So this is the z prime plane, and z is any arbitrary point in this plane, and this small circle around this point z is the initial contour. So if we evaluate the residue, we get the function back. Now suppose this function has a branch cut. So here, this is the branch cut of this function. And we deform the initial contour to wrap around the branch cut. So this bigger contour is a deformed contour. And this part wraps around the branch cuts. So if we do this, then the same function can be written in terms of the discontinuity of this function. So by discontinuity, I mean the difference between the values of the function above and below its branch cut. So this is the value above the branch cut, and this is the value below the branch cut, and you take the difference and compute the discontinuity. Now consider an example where a function can be reproduced from the dispersion relation by knowing only the discontinuity. So z power alpha is a function which has a branch cut for non-integer values of alpha when z is negative. So the discontinuity of this function is the same function times a phase factor. So this is this phase factor depends on the exponent alpha. So if we use this and plug it in the dispersion relation here and do this integral from -infinity to 0, because this is where the discontinuity lies in, then we end up getting the same function back. So I will now discuss this in the context of conformal field theory. So this is the correlator in the conformal field theory, and these G's are the conformal blocks. So the analytic structure of the correlator follows from the analytic structure of the conformal block. Now let me repeat the expression for the conformal block in 4 dimensions. So this is a hypergeometric function times some exponent. So in the z variable, this exponent z power beta, it has a branch cut when z is negative. So this is the branch cut that comes from z power beta. And the hypergeometric function has a branch cut when z is greater than 1. So these are the 2 branch cut structures that we have in the variable z. Now this is the conformal block in 4 dimensions, but we don't know the conformal block in d dimension. The closed form expression is not known, but we know the integral representation. And from that integral representation, we can actually show that the same analytic structure is valid in any dimension for the conformal block. So we propose a dispersion relation which expresses the CFT correlator as an integral over its discontinuity. So this is the CFT correlator, and this is a single variable dispersion relation in terms of the variable z. So the z bar variable, we just keep it as it is. We do not do any dispersion relation in this variable. And we write the correlator. We are again following the same trick as Cauchy's residue theorem. So we write the correlator as a residue of this pole in the variable z prime. And since we know now the branch cut structure of this, we deform this initial contour and get this larger contour which encircles the branch cut. And now when we do this, we have the arc contributions plus this part which comes from this discontinuity. So this arc contribution is 1. I will show you why. Now, if we want to look at the arc contribution, we have to look at the large Z behavior of this correlator, which is given by the U channel expression, U channel OP. So this is the correlator which is expanded in U channel in powers of 1 by Z and 1 by Z bar. And this expansion looks like this. So it has a ZZ bar to the minus of delta minus L over 2. Now, since we are interested in the large arc behavior, that is for large Z behavior, from this expression, you can see that only primary operators for which this delta minus L is negative or 0, only those terms will contribute to the arc at infinity. Now, in a unitary CFT, there is something which is known as a unitarity bound, which says that the operators in the theory are bounded from below. So if we have spinning operators for non-zero L, this is the unitary bound. And for scalar operators, this is the bound. And for identity, this is 0. So this unitary bound tells us that only the identity operator contributes to the arc at infinity. So all the other operators are like, they don't contribute.
Sorry, but if you're talking of the Ising model, that is not really a unitary CFT, right?
There are actually some, the Wilson-Fisher theory is non-unitary in some sense, but the operators like the non-unitarity is there only when you are in non-integer dimensions. So if you finally analytically continue to integer epsilon, then it is fine.
But then it's a trivial fixed point.
No, it's not a trivial fixed point, because the trivial fixed point is only at in 4 dimensions. That is when epsilon is 0. But in other dimension, it is not.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so now the branch cut from the overall factor, which is this z power exponent times some exponent, non-integer exponent, it is simpler to compute the discontinuity which comes from this than the hypergeometric function. Because in the example that we discussed, if we have a branch cut like this, then the discontinuity is only the same function times some phase factor. So the discontinuity of the conformal block when z is less than 0, this acquires a phase which depends on the operator dimensions and spin times the same conformal block. And this is actually very useful, because now we can use crossing symmetry to express this complicated discontinuity which comes from the hypergeometric function to write this discontinuity in terms of this discontinuity from this exponent. So we are interested in computing this discontinuity at z greater than 1. And we use crossing symmetry, which is the equality of f z bar to f1 minus z1 minus z bar. And using a coordinate change, we can write it like this. So if we know this, and together we have crossing, we can actually fix the discontinuity when z is greater than 1. So with this, we end up getting this expression for the correlation function. And in this expression, this is the only part that we have to compute, which is a discontinuity of the conformal block when z is less than 0. So this is the final dispersion relation. Now let's try to see how this works in an example. Okay, so let's consider the mean field theory correlator, the 4-point correlator in a mean field theory. We can actually compute this correlator as a sum over 2-point weak contractions. So we have this correlator and we check this factor out. So this is just a convention, how we were defining the correlator. And we end up getting this expression for the function f. Now we will show how the presence of identity operator in the OPE can compute this correlator from the dispersion relation. So we have the identity operator in S channel. So for identity, delta is 0, L equals 0, and the coefficient is 1. And the conformal block is also 1. So for the identity, this contribution is just 1 over z bar to the delta phi. So we compute the discontinuity of this function, and then again we plug it in the dispersion relation, and we end up getting this expression. So this tells us that the identity operator in the OPE reproduces the mean field theory correlator. So this is just the mean field theory correlator from the dispersion. Now the correlator can be further decomposed into conformal blocks and used to compute the OPE data. So this is how we decompose the correlator in the conformal blocks. So these C's are not known now. We know the left-hand side from the dispersion, and we decompose it. We just match powers of Z and Z bar from both sides, and then we compute the OP coefficients C0. And this is what we get. And these are schematically operators of the form when we have two fundamental fields contracted with L number of derivatives and also some box operator. So this L stands for the spin of this operator. So this tells us how the dispersion relation can be used in the mean field theory. Now let's see how it works in a perturbative conformal field theory. So we expand, by perturbative CFT we mean that we expand the operator dimension, OP coefficients, and the correlator in a perturbative parameter G. So G is any perturbative parameter. So we are expanding around the mean field theory. So this part, so this is the mean field bare dimension for the mean field theory. And these are the corrections. So these are the first order and second order anomalous dimensions and so on. And similarly, these are the corrections to the OP coefficients, where again we are perturbing, like this is the mean field theory correlator. And we already know this mean field theory results from the previous slide. And this is the correlator. Now using the dimension as input, we compute the correlator and the OP corrections order by order in perturbative expansion.
Sorry, how do you get the corrections again? I didn't get it. How do you, so how do you get the corrections
No,
without?
these are all unknown. So I am assuming that there is a perturbative parameter, and
I understand, but I guess you're able to determine this f, right? In some in how you're doing that.
yes, that is, I'm using the dispersion relation. So these things are, I am using the operator dimension as an input, and now I will use the
The
dispersion
assumption is that
relation.
the branch cut comes purely from this operator dimension. That is the point.
Yes, that will become clear in the next slide. Yes.
I see. So only from the but how is it an assumption, or is it something that is true only in perturbation theory, or I mean, okay, maybe you can explain.
That the discontinuity is determined by the spectrum.
Yes. Why?
This is only in perturbation theory.
Only in perturbation theory this can be true, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I see. Because
I mean, we don't have any non-perturbative example as of now, but the dispersion relation is completely general. But the fact that the discontinuity is determined by the spectrum, it's true in perturbative CFT.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So this is the discontinuity of the conformal block, and now. And this depends on this phase factor. So this phase factor is very important, and you will see why. So this factor involves the operator dimensions, and we know the operator dimensions like this. So if we plug this in this expression, you see that due to the form of the phase factor, so it's 1 minus exponential some stuff, this the order 0 correction goes away. So it starts at order 1. So it starts at order G. So since this is already at order G, this is the form of the discontinuity of this correlator. So we want to compute F1 using the dispersion, and we see that the discontinuity of F1 is fixed by this gamma 1, which we'll use as input. And sorry, there is a typo. It should be C. So this is the 0th order OP corrections that we already know from the previous order.
So, Parijat, one way of putting this is as follows. Suppose you know a specific CFT and you do a small perturbation away from that and you stay marginal perturbation, then the change in the spectrum determines the change in the 3-point function, the OP coefficients. That's a statement. Now.
Yes. Yeah. Because I mean, the 4-point correlator and the CFT data, they contain the same amount of information, but like what you said is only true order by order in perturbation theory. I mean, here we are interested in the first order correction to the correlation function that is determined by the first order correction to the anomalous dimension, and not on the OP at that particular order. I mean, C1 doesn't play a role here. That's the point.
Okay, but then I would be surprised if this perturbation theory is Borel summable generically, and you don't need any non-perturbative effects or something that never arises, right?
How do you say that from here?
No, I'm just saying it might be a little bit in that maybe in some examples it is true that you don't get any non-perturbative terms. This is Borel summable.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you know that there won't be any non-perturbative? It can have non-perturbative, like it can have Borel poles also in this. So in that case, there will be non-perturbative terms, right? And you cannot make any comment about those.
Yeah, this is not valid for whatever I'm saying is not valid for non-perturbative stuff. That is true.
Okay.
And also, like you have to have already some input from this spectrum. You cannot compute those from the from this dispersion relation. So already you have to have some valid CFT input.
Okay.
Okay, so the point is that since this discontinuity determines the correlator via the dispersion relation, it follows that the 4-point function is completely determined by the spectrum of the CFT. So now we compute the Wilson-Fisher correlation function from the dispersion relation. So these are the first few operators that we have in the spectrum. So this is the operator phi square, and this is the spinning operators, 2 phi's with L number of derivatives. And you see from this, these expressions that at order epsilon, only this operator phi square receives a correction. This correction for the higher spin operators, they start at order epsilon square. So this implies that if we want to compute the first order correction to the correlator, only this operator phi square contributes. So
What is
there
the
is
value of n?
n is 0 here. The
N
first
is 0. Oh, it's
yes.
just a scale.
But I mean, at up to this order n is 0, but next order n will contribute. So from this expression, you see that there is only one conformal block, which is the conformal block for the operator phi square, that contributes to this diagram. And this is the discontinuity. So using this, we compute the correction to the correlator, and we end up getting this expression. So this is this diagram. So we have 4 operators. This is a contact diagram, and this is coming only from a single conformal block. Now, once we have this correlation function, we can
Where did the polylogs come from? Li2?
So this comes from the dispersion relation. Like if you have log, you have this log, and now
And
you are integrating over. Yes. So now we can expand this F1 and compute the correction to the OP coefficient C1 for this diagram. And this is what we get. So here only, again, n equals 0 and L equals 0 contribute at this order. Now, if you want to go to next order, you see that all the operators, the non-zero L operators contribute. So we have computed this F2 also using this dispersion relation. So this is equivalent to computing the, sorry, these diagrams. So what we get using the dispersion relation is the closed form expression for all these diagrams. And that's how this works perturbatively. So this is like a summary of this dispersion relation. So you start with the identity operator in S channel, and then you compute the mean field theory correlator, which is F0. And then from by decomposing this into a conformal block expression, you compute the OP correction at first order, at 0th order. And at next order, you use the input from the previous order and also the anomalous dimension at that particular order as your input, and then you compute F1. And again, you decompose it to compute C1 and so on. So this is like, this goes on. But we have computed only this up to order epsilon squared, because if you want to go to higher order, say epsilon cubed, then all the non-zero n value, so they contribute. And we are working on that. We haven't been able to do this completely, because whenever you have again this n dependence, it's a bit complicated to do this. But this is how it works perturbatively. So I think.
Sorry, but if all this contributes, then is a systematic way to solve it, you think, at any arbitrary orders, or you're finding that out now?
That's how it works actually in Bootstrap. Like if you go to like higher order in epsilon, all I mean infinite number of higher operators start contributing. So if you want to systematically solve this, you have to develop an algorithm to take care of those higher order operators also.
I see. So that is where the linear programming will come in, this using this polytope cell.
Yeah, that like that's probably a different story. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me summarize now. So we have shown how a critical point system is governed by conformal symmetry, and the physical observables of the critical systems are expressed in terms of the CFT data, which is the spectrum and the OP coefficients. And each universality class corresponds to a different set of CFT data. Now we use the enhanced conformal symmetry at the critical point, and we study it in a Lagrangian free approach. And this is the idea of conformal bootstrap. So we use only self-constraining constraints.
Sorry, but why is your approach a Lagrangian free approach?
Because we have not used any Lagrangian. So this,
But you
we have the
after
bootstrap
all,
equation.
the input to the corrections in the spectrum comes from
That you
perturbation.
can actually solve from other bootstrap equations. Like
Okay, I see.
there are some,
I see. Okay, but
yeah.
but
In
just for
principle,
your approach, one can just simply get it from usual Lagrangian approach, right? I mean,
yes, yeah, that is, I mean, the Feynman diagram approach is a perfectly well-defined approach. So you can
so
compute
as
the
far as the
2-point.
dispersion method is concerned, one can simply use this traditional Lagrangian approach to just for computing the shift in the spectrum.
Yes, because like if you are only looking at the dispersion relation, you need only the spectrum as your input. So this comes from the 2-point function. So that 2-point function is much simpler to compute than the 4-point function. So the dispersion relation is actually bypassing one step for the Feynman diagrams. So if you want to compute the 4-point function from the traditional Feynman diagram approach, then it's a bit complicated. I mean, you can do this, but you have to, if you go to higher orders in epsilon, then you have to evaluate many more diagrams. Okay, so yeah, so we have shown how this can be applied to the Wilson-Fisher theory to extract the CFT data, and the correlator can be reconstructed entirely from the spectrum. Now, along the lines of this current research, there are several future directions that can be explored. So, for example, exploring the conformal field theory at finite temperature using the methods of conformal bootstrap. So, like solving the KMS condition using the finite temperature conformal field theory techniques that can be done. And there are also some.
Even the 2-point function is hard, right? In finite temperature.
So in finite temperature, you have the 2-point functions are non-trivial. So then you impose a constraint on the 2-point function. And that is a bootstrap equation that you want to solve.
Okay.
I mean, is this what you asked?
No, I mean, I have not. I have no idea how you can do that because I don't know. I just the question was just simply to because it seems like here you have to know the 2-point function first and then you use it. But this is not straightforward at finite temperature. This 2-point function itself is highly non-trivial.
Yes, so the finite temperature bootstrap is the equality of 2-point function in different channels. Like, so this is not a 4-point function constraint, because
you're using that just to
yes.
you're using to solve the 2-point function itself.
Yes, yeah, because when you have a scale, you don't have the usual CFT, so you are breaking the scale some way. So you cannot, like, the 2-point function is not completely fixed from symmetry. So similarly, you can study the semi-infinite systems where you break the conformal symmetry by introducing a boundary. So these things are related to like this surface critical exponents when you have surface phenomena, and it can be used to probe the bulk CFT. And there are actually some non-unitary CFTs in higher dimensions that can be explored, like the Q-state critical pots model using the idea of conformal bootstrap. So this is something that can be done. And as far as the dispersion relation is concerned, so we have shown that this works for a perturbative CFT, but it would be nice to see if this can be like, if there is an example of a non-perturbative CFT where it can be applied. So the big picture is that can we make it a framework to study quantum field theory at the critical point in a Lagrangian free approach? And finally, is it possible to modify the bootstrap techniques away from the critical point when you don't have the conformal symmetry, but you have the usual symmetries of quantum field theory? So there has been some progress in this direction using the ideas of S-matrix bootstrap. So these things can be like further studied using similar tools. So I think I should stop now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this nice talk. So time for questions now.
I have this question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's even if it's a question, but see, the thing is that we know the 2D Ising model. We know the CFT completely. So instead of starting from 4 and going to 3, is there some way of going from 2 to 3 where we use the fact that we know a lot about all the correlators in 2D?
But the thing is that like here I am using the fact that it's d greater than 2. So the conformal blocks and everything. So these things
I'm just asking a general question. I mean, the point is that the reason I'm saying that is because if you look at in 2D, we have, a much more, we have local conformal symmetry. And so the Verma module is very, very big. And the Verma module decomposes into, if you think in terms of just a global group, quasi-conformal primaries, that's what will map. But you get a nice huge module and you can track them some way. If you can track them to 3D, you're doing good, right? I mean,
that's right, yeah, but I am not sure whether like extrapolating from 2 to 3, it's using the minimal models, whether that can be done.
Okay.
Parijat, actually, I didn't get the punchline of your talk because so there is a usual bootstrap methods, right? And you have some alternative method. So now it looks like to get the major inputs of this spectral function itself, you need some bootstrap to begin with, at least to get this point, the point that you're perturbing from. But then at some higher order, you still get some equations which look like which will require some sort of after a bootstrap after all to solve. So I didn't quite get the big picture from the new method that you just described.
So one thing is that it's not true that like we are not using, I'm not using bootstrap. I am not bypassing bootstrap completely, because you see here.
No, my question is it a scheme to make bootstrap more efficient, or what is this?
It's kind of like, so even if you know the CFT data, suppose we want to compute the correlator. So then like you have to, at each order in perturbative expansion, you have to do this resummation and then you compute the correlator. So it's kind of stuff that directly give you the correlator.
Okay. So the point is that you don't care about the 3-point functions at all. You just simply get the correlation function. You don't care.
In principle, I am actually caring about the 3-point function, because if you want to go to the next order, then you need the input for the 3-point function at the previous order.
At the previous order.
Yes. So like in this, expression.
Okay.
So the point is that like using this method, I'm just computing directly this F0, F1, and so on. But like if suppose I want to compute F1, then I need this C0 as also the input. So this is the OP coefficient that I compute from the previous order. So I directly.
Also, the main point is that you don't need to know the entire spectrum. It's sufficient to know a part of it only.
That's
because
right.
otherwise that will not work. So
that's right.
So I see. Okay.
And also another thing, like I am not, it's not true that I'm not using the crossing symmetry. So here you see that I'm using crossing symmetry because I want to write the complicated discontinuity when z is greater than 1 in terms of this. So that can only be done when we have crossing symmetry. So I am actually using that input as well. So
I see. So it's just a way to do some part of the bootstrap analytically in a way.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And the second
Specifically,
thing
I
is
would
that
say that if you want to compute the correlator directly.
I see. Yeah. Without
Yeah.
okay. I see. I get some idea. But then you said that the talk was ever constraining conformal field theories. Where is the constraint? How do you impose constraints here? What do you mean by?
I mean, this constraints means like you have the CFT data as the spectrum and also the OP coefficient. So here you compute one part of it. So you take the spectrum as your input, but then you compute the OP as your output from decomposition.
But I don't see any. You haven't mentioned any specific constraints so far. I mean.
But this is like this when we decompose, when we compute these. So these are the CFT data that we are computing. These OP corrections.
I see. Okay, so your point is somehow that at least in certain perturbative sense, if you know all the deltas, you should be able to extract all the 3-point functions from there, at least in a
Right.
perturbation, in some perturbative sense, provided you're perturbing about some exactly known point, right?
Right.
I see. Okay. Any further question for Parijat?
Just remind me where crucially you use the fact that d is greater than 2, strictly greater than 2.
The conformal blocks that I'm using, I mean, here I am, I have only global symmetry.
Yeah, that's okay. We can always treat even the 2D thing as if ignoring the local thing as a global. So,
Yes.
I mean, that shouldn't get messed up. I mean, it just resums a whole bunch of things and puts it together. So,
Yeah.
but that is only a technicality, right?
But the spectrum will be different.
No, the spectrum of quasi-conformal primaries is different from the spectrum of conformal primaries. So
Yes.
if you just focus, I mean, if you focus on the spectrum of that means the ones
Only the
which is
primary
only
operator.
L0, L plus minus. I mean 1. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. And also this, the form of the conformal block that is different in 2D.
No. You can bring it to that. I mean, form when you write it in that, and you can expand it in terms of quasi-conformal primaries. It should work. I mean, I don't see why you're excluding d equal to 2. Even
I mean, the conformal block, this expression in 2D is different, but
no, but that is because they'll be doing the full. What they mean by
yes,
a conformal block there would be the full local thing put together, right?
that's right. Yes.
So it'll be like in your top expression, it'll be like carrying out a whole bunch of summations,
Right.
and so it's a summed expression.
So here, I mean, if we do that, we have to include that that part also, right? But that I didn't. I never did that. And also this unitarity bound that I am using. So in 2D there is this. There is no gap actually. That is also
Yeah.
important.
Okay, this is better. This is much better. Okay, so that so in 2D you would say that the answer won't be 1.
Yeah, there is no gap. Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to do it like evaluate it explicitly. And this is a huge simplification because there is
Yeah.
only the identity operator.
Okay, good.
So,
But no, but even then, if D is 2, only all the spinless operators will contribute.
but then like you have to evaluate the R
No,
for all these
all the
operators.
spinless. No, fine. So this is more robust statement that you're assuming D. This is why you
Yeah.
need to take D greater than 2. Okay,
Yes.
strictly greater than 2. Good.
Okay. what about solving in some large N expansion? So there's certain, suppose you know some CFTs, could you like, is there some example?
One thing about the large N is that, like, suppose we have this, I mean, this 3D large N, say 1/n expansion, then, so using the ideas of Polyakov bootstrap, you can actually compute the CFT data, so that we actually have done it in another paper. But as far as this one is concerned, so here you have to know the conformal blocks, the closed form expression or the integral representation. But if you're in 3 dimension, in odd dimension, that is not known.
Oh, I see.
So even dimension is better in that sense.
Ah, okay.
But you can use other bootstrap techniques that works perfectly well. At least up to some certain order in 1/n it works.
Okay, so any further question? So if not, let us thank Parijat for this very nice talk, and
Thank you.
visit us at IIT Madras sometime.
Yeah.
Whenever
Sure.
to India, and hopefully not so much in the future. Let's see. Yeah.
So, right now, we can't look so far ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I will, next time I go, I'll try to visit. Thanks.
Do come.
Okay. So have a nice rest of the week, all of you, and see you back tomorrow. There is this talk by
9 in the morning, I just noticed that.
yeah. Okay.
9:30 is it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Okay. Bye.
Okay, bye.